NATO is well suited to coordinating this international effort and ensuring that all participating nations are working effectively together toward our shared goals.
I'm hopeful that we will get the necessary assets in the very near future.
Less than a month ago, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was touting the ability of NATO to run operations against the forces of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, although just how broadly shared the goals were seemed a bit unclear. By last week, NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen was scouring the alliance in hopes of more planes to protect civilians as member nations disagreed on how, or even whether, to pursue removal of Gaddafi himself.
Some see in the Libyan campaign more chance for the destruction of NATO than of Gaddafi. To analyze the factors at play, what they mean for Libya, for Europe, and for the United States, for your ears only, we're joined again by Sarwar Kashmeri. He's a fellow of the Foreign Policy Association, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's International Security Program, and author of NATO 2.0, Reboot or Delete, from Potomac Books this month. Welcome back to our program.
Thank you very much for having me again, David.
What are the major issues dividing NATO over Libyan operations, and which nations are lining up on each side?
I love that quote that you just played from the NATO Secretary General about being hopeful receiving more airplanes, because 18 months ago he made a similar quote about being very hopeful for receiving a few hundred trainers in Afghanistan, and he's still waiting, and I think that he's going to be waiting a little while before he gets some more airplanes. The question you ask about NATO and Libya is really very key, and I think there are a number of parts to it. First of all, there's a political part where, as you know, Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Obama and Britain and France are calling for regime change, basically, but the other countries are simply not agreed to that political objective. Then there is a NATO piece. I've argued for some time that NATO is no longer a very capable alliance. It's very dysfunctional. Its members think in very, very different ways. The Central and Eastern Europeans, for example, think Russia is their biggest threat. The Western allies continue to build their trade with Russia. So there are all of those issues. I had always thought that NATO at least practiced and drilled to fight together, but we are learning today that Britain and France are running out of laser-guided bombs. America has plenty of them, but they don't fit into French and British planes. And so now you have an alliance of 28 countries, of which only 6 are really joining in the air war: Britain, France, Denmark, Norway, Holland, and Canada. And of those, we're starting to see some breakage between the two main ones, Britain and France, where Britain continues to insist on regime change, but France does not. So I'm not certain where all of this goes. I'm just reminded of Napoleon Bonaparte saying that if you want to take Vienna, for heaven's sake, take Vienna. If not, stay home.
You say the campaign against Gaddafi would be better handled without any U.S. involvement by switching command from NATO to a European Union institution called the Common Security and Defense Policy,
yes,
though it has no actual forces or weapons. What is it?
Well, the Common Security Defense Policy is the military, very badly named, I might say, but is the military establishment that France and Britain jump-started after the Balkan War to make sure that Britain was never left alone and had to rely on just NATO and America. Over the last decade, it has sent out 27 missions. Many of them have been very small, but there are 2 that have been pretty sizable. The naval force that the EU sent out off Somalia is twice the size of NATO, and 3 years ago they sent out a brigade-level force to the center of Africa to help protect refugees under the UN flag. Neither NATO nor CSDP have any military assets, none. They use the same soldiers, the same planes, the same ships that belong to the European Union nations. You simply take a badge off, put another badge on, and off you go. And so my contention has always been that this is a European periphery issue, that ultimately it will be resolved largely by Europeans. And the media has not focused on this, but 3 days ago, the European Union has actually put together, they've made the political decision to send a brigade-level force, guess where? To Libya. They have set up the force, they've appointed a commander, they've funded it for 3 months, and they're just waiting for the UN to ask. I would not be surprised, David, if you find a European force going into Libya before too long to help both with the humanitarian issue and with the political bifurcation taking place in Libya.
In the Middle East, you say it would be more capable than NATO precisely because it has no U.S. component, which NATO officials are now seeking more from. How can that be?
NATO has always been seen as an extension of U.S. foreign policy, and it has not been welcomed in many, many areas of the Middle East and in Africa. A good case in point is the African Command, which was set up under the Bush administration to help provide military and tactical support in Africa. No African country wanted it in Africa, so we finally wound up setting it up in Stuttgart, and it is now being moved to South Carolina. So the Europeans are much closer there. They have a much more synchronous relationship with the Middle East and with Africa, and in many cases, the EU mission in Chad in the Central African Republic is a good one. They refuse to let NATO come in to help protect refugees, but they welcome the European Union.
Why do you think the EU CSDP would be more united and effective on Libya than the European nations that are now divided within NATO?
Because the CSDP and the European military establishment, David, is Europeans running Europe's business. And we now have, as of 4 days ago, a case in point. How do you suppose the European Union got the political consensus to agree to send a military force, a brigade-level force, to Libya?
Boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground. So there you have it. It's Europe making decisions for Europeans, and that's where it should be. You know, for my book, I talked to every key military leader in Europe, and I asked all of them, listen, you have the capabilities now to defend Europe and fight a campaign in its periphery. And almost uniformly they said, yes, if we have the will. And it is my feeling that Libya, being a third-rate military power, provides an opportunity for America to give Europe that will and to recalibrate the transatlantic security equation, which basically hasn't changed since the Second World War.
Sarwar Kashmeri is a fellow of the Foreign Policy Association, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's International Security Program, and author of NATO 2.0, Reboot or Delete, from Potomac Books this month.